So over to you, Jesse. Um, One of the things that most impressed me about this film and your performance was the physicality of it. Um, it, mime is usually something that takes a lifetime to learn, and especially your work with your hands was just so impressive. So I'm wondering if you had prior mime training, or if other training you had came in handy. Like how did you learn that on a movie production timeline?
This wasn't like a typical movie production timeline. We had about probably 9 months between me like reading the script and shooting. God, maybe even more actually, and yeah, actually possibly more. And Jonathan found this unbelievable mime teacher. His name is Lauren Eric Salm, Salm, is his last name, and he is not only an unbelievable mime, and also he studied with Marceau in France for years, but also has become like kind of an unofficial chronicler of Marceau's life. And so he kind of gave me this amazing two-pronged education of the actual practical mime work, and then also history of mime, history of Marceau, and the reason why Marceau did certain things. Just by way of brief example, like Lauren studied under Marceau, and Lauren would tell me that Marceau would always kind of correct his students. Like, for example, when Marceau would do this move, he would always do like this kind of gesture. He would always have these two fingers separated. And when the students copied him, Marceau would say, no, 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 you keep them together. That's mine. And so Lauren kind of gave me some of these wonderful little tips of how I can emulate not just a good mime, but actually very specifically Marceau, kind of warts and all, the little things that he did wrong that, not wrong, the little things that were specific to him. And so that was just an amazing experience. In terms of my past history with mime, I didn't really have any history with mime, except my mother was a birthday party clown in New Jersey. And so she would dress like, well, her makeup would be like Marceau, and she appreciated the art of mime. Like, I was aware of mime at a young age because my mom was a clown, and it's kind of a cousin of mime. And I took clowning seriously because my mother was a clown. So I think mime, especially during like the 80s, it was seen as like kind of became a punchline. And I would say in my family, clowning and mime and magicians are not punchlines because it's my mother's life's work. So I think I had maybe a baseline level of appreciation.
So you obviously studied very hard to make all of that work, because the physicality of the performance in general is really quite stunning. But what were some of the challenges in general trying to portray someone who is so iconic, and so iconic for his physicality?
Well, there were a few mitigating factors. One is that this was him beginning, and so it didn't have to have the polished look that we would know. And then, 90% of the movie is him not doing mime. So if the movie was like 50-50 mime and acting, then I think I'd probably not be the right actor. It'd probably be an actor maybe who was a mime first. But, it's a dramatic movie with mime. So, in terms of his personality and portraying a personality, there are some great advantages to playing a real person, because especially if the person is well known, there's usually a trove of video of stories about them. So with Marceau, there's these great interviews of him as an older man, and he had a kind of quality that I would describe as, on the one hand, somebody who was like kind of a very confident artist. On the other hand, somebody who's French, and the attitude that necessarily emerges when you're in that culture versus my culture, which I would call more self-deprecating and, kind of sarcastic. He kind of took himself more seriously than I would, let's say, feel comfortable taking myself or speaking about myself. And so I could kind of take all that and then extrapolate what it might have looked like as a young man.
Interesting. So clearly I would say you've succeeded at that.
Oh.
So I have a more general question that either or both of you could jump in on. Obviously, there are a lot of Holocaust films out there, a lot of World War II films out there, especially this year. So what makes this story stand out to you in the midst of, you know, this whole genre of Holocaust films? Why this story and not another?
Jonathan, you're on mute. Or should I go? Was that on purpose, or should I go? Or do you it's your movie. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I never thought I would make a Holocaust film. You know, the story is too personal for me. Both sides of my family were killed in the Holocaust. What made me change my mind specifically with this story is that it's not a story about extermination. It's a story about salvation and heroism, and it's a story about a bunch of kids taking responsibility to save the lives of others and forgetting about their own personal ambitions to really put everything on the line and at risk. And also because it's at its core the story of an artist who thinks the war is stopping him from fulfilling his dream of becoming an artist, when it actually is the thing that makes him a real artist, because he puts art in the service of others. And I don't think, you know, it goes beyond the typical story that I've heard. I've never seen that in any movie, but specifically not in any Holocaust movie. So I thought it was different enough to be worth telling. And I do think it's the type of civilian hero that we need. You know, there's so many war heroes. There's not many civilian heroes in the middle of a war and in the middle of the worst possible war. And I was very inspired by it. I mean, part of my personal story is escaping from a military dictatorship, you know, so anybody who does anything against the military is in good terms with me.
But you won't protect them at all costs. You're still putting yourself at grave danger.
Exactly.
Yeah. But they are friends with you. Yeah. Yeah, I also love that it was like, I also love that it was like a Jewish hero, like, because the movie I grew up on as the Holocaust movie, or I don't know, didn't grow up on this, I'd be a traumatized person, but, you know, Schindler's List, of like the movie where it's, the kind of rich, powerful German businessman who kind of grows a conscience, to me is, obviously it was a great story and everything. But what I love about this movie is it doesn't require some kind of like external, powerful hand to reach down and help some innocent victims. It is, a Jewish guy who's not necessarily even, a good fighter, to do it in the most unlikely way.
So one of the things that I couldn't help but notice about this film is there's a lot of children involved. And I was wondering what, from both of your perspectives, what it was like to be so outnumbered by that many children. Because some of those scenes must have had 100 kids in them. I mean, there's that old saying about never work with children or animals. Was that true? And how do you actually wrangle that many children?
Also, don't work with children and don't work with snow, and we combine them both.
Yeah.
I have to say, I mean, I find it easier sometimes to work with children than with adults. You know, I mean, children are natural actors, and we were lucky, or we specifically did it in a way that we most of the lead kids were from a specific Jewish school in Prague. And being a Jew in Prague, they all come from families who survived the Holocaust. So this story was very important to them and for their parents, who, prepare them for a long time before we shot and told them to take everything very seriously. So when we asked them to be emotional, they were emotional immediately because they knew what this was about. And I have to say that they completely transformed Jesse. Jesse's character was in many ways because of the way he was interacting with the children. It's not the same to do mime, against a mirror in a studio than it is to do it in front of kids who are actually reacting to what he's doing. And that beautiful mime sequence at the beginning of the movie truly transforms the character. And it was fascinating to shoot it because in a way it was transforming the way Jesse was miming. He had been training for months but he never done it in front of a bunch of kids, and it was a completely different experience. And you can see it on screen, you know, that he's having fun, he's enjoying, he completely forgot about the technique and started focusing on the kids. So I think it's a blessing. Anybody who's afraid of kids doesn't know what the essence of acting is. You know, I wish all actors were kids.
Yeah, it was really amazing, especially in the sense that, like, in terms of my own miming and being kind of like nervous, because I wanted obviously the mime to be great. And then when I started performing for the kids, I realized it just had to entertain these kids. It would succeed and fail based on these kids liking it, distracting them from the horrors of their lives at the time. And so it became this kind of like rubric for me. If the kids liked it, then it was going well. It was not so much about perfecting the gestures as making the kids happy.
Well, it sounds like having them around was a pleasant experience, so that's good.
Yeah.
And it sounds like they were able to be made happy, which is also great to hear.
Yeah.
Because not all kids in show business are known for being like that. So I want to remind everyone, if you have questions, put them in the chat box, because I'm running low on prepared questions, but I still have a few more. So speaking of what it was like to be on that set, the other thing I couldn't help but notice was that there were a whole lot of German actors, and they were in Nazi uniforms a lot. Like, there were a lot of German actors playing Nazis, right? And there were some great performances, and I'm sure they are all wonderful people, you know, as humans. But what was it like being a Jew and an artist on set with a bunch of Germans running around in Nazi uniforms?
In Munich and Nuremberg, where we filmed the movie. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, Jonathan, do you want to...
Yeah, I mean, it's surreal. It's weird. It's strange. I never hugged that many SS officers in my life. You know, I mean, it's the weirdest thing. After he does a great performance, you give him a hug. You know, you're amazing. You know, and I mean, I mean, happily, Matthias, the guy who plays Klaus Barbie, is an incredible actor, but he's also a true artist, like a theater actor who comes from a dynasty of theater actors, and he was able to make it very comfortable because he was joking about it. You know, I mean, he didn't make the heaviness of a German playing a Nazi overwhelm the environment. You know, he was playing a character, and he knew what this character was like, and it was very important, because to me, to have a German actor play a Nazi, you know, I mean, there is an understanding of the whole thing that inevitably, I think, it's deeper than any other nationality when it comes to understanding what the Nazis were. And it was important for Matthias to show Klaus Barbie as part of a nation of Nazis who are completely convinced they are on the right side of history, and who think they are the heroes of this whole story. And that came across incredibly well with his performance, but it was tough, you know. I mean, shooting in Nuremberg, we shot in the place where the Nuremberg rallies took place, and we shot that incredible scene at the end when Jesse does a performance in front of Patton's troops. And you know, there is no moment that you feel that you're just making a movie. You know, it always feels like you're doing something that has historical relevance for yourself, for your family, for your people. I mean, the fact that Jewish artists and German artists are working together in the site of the Nuremberg rallies to tell a story of peace and understanding is in itself a creative vengeance against the Nazis. And it was always like that. And also, like Jesse said, we were shooting in Munich. I was sleeping 3 blocks away from Hitler's apartment in Munich, you know. So it wasn't like, okay, we wrapped, let's go to a bar and party, you know. I mean, everything around you reminded you of this event. And I have to say, it was an incredible experience. I mean, not always pleasant, you know. I mean, I'm shooting the opening of the movie where this, you know, couple with a daughter are saying the same prayer I say with my daughter in the same, basically the same street where that event is taking place, you know. So it's inevitable to feel that this this could have happened to you, and it happened to so many of my relatives. And I think if you are able to do a movie and feel all that, it's a dream come true, because at the end of the day, we all strive to do stuff that has more meaning than just a commercial product that may hit some screens. We want to make something special, and it definitely felt that way.
So luckily the audience has chimed in with some interesting questions. So if memory serves, both of you are close to my age, which means I probably know the answer to this question, but have either of you ever met Marcel Marceau?
I didn't meet him personally, but as a kid, I did see him perform live in Caracas, Venezuela.
Aha. He's actually, so I'm new to the Detroit area, but he performed here many times and received an award, the Wallenberg Medal at the University of Michigan. So I think a lot of people in our audience have seen him perform multiple times. So
oh, wow, yeah. I mean, that is an incredible speech when he received that medal. It's a really fascinating thing, because he speaks specifically about what the events in the movie, and a lot of it was a part of my research, because he didn't speak a lot about this. He never wanted to be recognized, and you guys were one of the few who were able to get him to talk about it, and it was very special.
The Detroit Jewish community is very good at getting people to talk about things. So we have a couple of sort of fact questions. One was about the scene at the end in front of General Patton's troops, and that is true to life. That did happen, right?
Yeah, in fact, he talks about it in that speech when he received the Wallenberg Medal. And he brags about the fact that he got his first good review at the Stars and Stripes paper of the Armed Forces. So it's not exactly certain that it happened in that place where we shot and everything, but that was the region where the Patton's army was stationed, and that's where he was placed as a liaison officer.
So another question that I think I'd like to hear both of you answer is, what would you like for the effect of this movie to be on people? So we'll start with Jesse, because you haven't said anything in a minute.
Sure. I mean, I never really think about it, but if pressed, I would say, the best effect a movie like this can have on somebody is for them to kind of like consider those most in need, because movie is about a guy who is living a fairly self-centered life, and who, as Jonathan put it a few minutes ago, thinks that the war is happening personally to him to stop his career of being a performer in dive bars. And so once he throws himself into helping others, he actually excels as an artist. And so I guess I hope people, if they are going to take away some kind of like moral feeling about it, is that that helping others is often not in conflict with the thing that you otherwise want to achieve.
Yeah, I think it's about taking responsibility, and if you are able to make a difference, if you're able to help others, you must, and also, I do think, given that this is a Jewish film festival, there was something that George Loinger told me when we met. He said that the only reason more French Jews were saved than Polish Jews were saved, percentage-wise, is that we lived in Strasbourg, which was a border town with Germany. So we all spoke German, and we've been hearing Hitler speak on the radio for 7 years. So when the Nazi troops entered France, we knew exactly what they were coming here to do, and we knew we had to escape. And he said that, a Jew always has to know that when somebody is saying to try to kill you is because they're going to try to kill you. And I thought that was a very important thing for 106 years old man to tell me. And I think it's a fact of life that they were able to react quicker than most of the rest of the Jews of Europe.
So another question from the audience. What was your thinking in choosing Klaus Barbie as the sort of main villain? I assume there were many Nazis to choose from, so why him?
Specifically, Barbie was obsessed with children. You know, I mean, one of the things he was trialed for was the murder of the children of Marceau, which is an orphanage where a bunch of Jewish children were hiding, and you know, it was like a specific obsession of his, and he was mentioned by Loinger as the guy they were running away from. You know, they knew he was the main threat, and he was very hands-on. So, and I was always familiar with his story because he hid in Bolivia, and me being from Venezuela, you know, I knew a lot about him. I did a ton of research about him, and the fact that he had a systematic way of using torture to get to dismantle any resistance movement, I thought was you know, at the heart of this whole story. And he's a very specific Nazi, and a specifically sadistic guy, a very young guy, a very good looking and charming guy. That I thought was also in a way Nazis are often portrayed as these monsters who you know can relate to in any way, shape, or form. And I thought it was important to show that this guy was as monstrous as he was a human being who was, you know, in love with his wife and had a kid, and was completely convinced he was doing the right thing. Because I think it's essential to understand that, to make sure it never happens again. You know, this weren't a bunch of aliens. This was human beings who got to that place where they thought exterminating millions of people is okay because you're doing it for your people. You know, so I think Barbie was a perfect, you know, villain to explore in this whole story.
Okay, more questions. Let's see. Well, I have another question to intersperse here, and this one is for Jesse. So your roles have over the years been very hyphenated, as it were. You seem to be a lot of movies that are like comedy horror or drama comedy, or, you know, those kinds of films that aren't, you know, clearly or only in one genre. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on where you would put the genre of this film. It is clearly dramatic, but so what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think I'm probably, like most people here, culturally just attracted to things that are funny and look for humor in places that, you know, are not going to be, let's say, codified as just something comic. That's certainly the case with this movie. I mean, you know, Marceau is a very funny performer. You know, you could watch him even when he's doing a dramatic piece. He's you know, he's always kind of aware of the, you know, of a, you know, a comic quality to, you know, as compared to some other mime that we're used to seeing that is like more abstracted and avant-garde. And so Jonathan is a funny person and wrote the characters as having funny banter when they're not, you know, in like you know, anybody would be when you're not in kind of immediate danger, and you come from a culture that, you know, values humor. Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I guess I just think, like, in any kind of great drama, there's always, you know, moments of levity, in the way that anytime you're in a dramatic situation in your own life, there's moments of levity and self-awareness and irony.
So a follow-up to that, we have someone in the audience who wants to know how your Jewish identity influenced your approach to this role.
Well, I mean, it was actually, I would say, I mean, well, when I started acting when I was like 19 years old in movies, I was really resistant to like being labeled as Jewish, because I just thought it'd be limiting as an actor, because you want to play different roles. And then over the years, I not only got more comfortable with it, but really started to embrace it. Once I kind of learned how the wonderful influence that Jews have had, like in the arts. And as I started to kind of get more comfortable with that, I started to kind of appreciate my place in that arena. And in terms of this movie, I would say just being in Germany and doing a movie like this with a 1-year-old child, because I had a baby who was about 1 at the time, it just totally changed my feeling about being Jewish. I grew up in the suburbs in New Jersey, and probably, I don't know where people live there in West Bloomfield or that area or whatever, where there's a lot of Jewish people in the suburb and it doesn't feel special or unusual. That's kind of where I grew up. And so it didn't feel like this unusual thing. I thought the majority of the world was Jewish. And so kind of being in Germany and doing a movie like this and having a baby, I kind of realized the phenomenon of our survival. And it just kind of made me feel quite different. When I went back to New York City the day after we filmed this movie, I went to the JCC in New York to show this documentary that I had produced. And it was like an all Jewish audience at the JCC. I remember just thinking, really for the first time, because my background is in theater, so I've been performing for Jewish audiences in New York since I'm a child. I remember thinking for the first time, right after we filmed Resistance and going to this JCC in New York, I remember thinking like, wow, what an unbelievable group of people that, here are people in the 70s and 80s going to this JCC. They could be doing anything. And here they are, this curious, interested group who's communing to see this documentary. And I just thought, I feel so proud and warm to be in this community and amongst these people. I'd never felt that way before. And that changed because of this movie.
Interesting. So progress has been made.
Yeah.
So another question for Jonathan. How difficult was it for the actors when shooting the pool scenes? Because those are quite intense.
It was difficult. It was definitely difficult. I mean, Clemence and Vita, the two actresses, I mean, they are, very European actresses in the sense that they truly become the character. There is technique, there is preparation, but there is complete transformation, and the horror that you see them portray in the film, they were definitely feeling, and it was difficult for all of us. I mean, the place couldn't be creepier. It wasn't tough to feel the horror, but also Matthias was so good and so intense, and that was shot in Nuremberg as well. I mean, there's something about shooting in Nuremberg, that you feel that it's the heart of the beast, even though it's not anymore, obviously, but it's there where it started, and it was definitely difficult. Happily, they were so well prepared, and it was so intense that it didn't take too long. I remember we wrapped early that night because we had an incredible performance already. But it wasn't because it was easy. It was because it was so hard that it was phenomenal very quickly.
Okay, so sorry, that was more flippant than I meant it to be. I was okaying all of the more questions that we've gotten, but thank you for that answer. I am always impressed when, I see actors in these situations that seem inhuman in one way or another, either because it's torturous, or I've been watching a lot of James Bond, so you see these amazing stunts that's like, how is a human doing that? So kudos to all of you theater artists for making that magic work. So I have, I'm going to stir up a little controversy, hopefully. So I would like both of you to answer this. And one person was asking, what are your feelings on how, if it is, or how critical it is that Jewish actors play Jewish roles in today's sort of film and theater world? Like, how critical do you think it is to the performance, to representation, to all of those things, that you know, Jewish characters are played by Jewish actors.
Oh, as opposed to a non-Jewish actor playing a Jewish character.
Correct.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know, because I tend to not like these things where you know, I just don't want to make a blanket statement about some kind of like moral rubric that the arts has to follow, because that just seems absurd. But what I do think is that there is certain things that I know as a Jewish person that are in me, that I've brought to characters that I've played that are Jewish, and those things have been to my advantage. Like things we discussed a minute ago, a sense of humor, a sense of self-awareness, of self-deprecation, a certain thoughtfulness that I would consider specifically, a certain kind of thoughtfulness that I would think is specifically Jewish. And if those things are required in the project or to the benefit of that project, then it might be helpful to have a Jewish person. But I certainly don't want to make a blanket statement about the kind of moral responsibility that people have to casting Jews. That just seems silly, and would be limiting to me, because I've played a lot of non-Jews.
Yeah, I think it's gotta be the right actor. You know, I mean, I think it obviously helps. You know, I mean, even with the children, you know, when we cast them, we ask them to sing Shalom Aleichem. You know, and only in the Jewish school they knew Shalom Aleichem. You know, so obviously it's easier in that sense. But I mean, when you look at the performance of Karl Markovic, who plays Jesse's father in the movie, first of all, I couldn't believe he's not Jewish. You know, he was in The Counterfeiters, which is one of the best World War II movies ever made, and he plays a Jew there. And he's played a Jew in a lot of films. He later told me that he also played a Nazi in a lot of films. So it's, you know, he's where we meet. But and he's not Jewish, but he couldn't be more Jewish in the film, you know, and so it really depends on the actor you get. I mean, the two girls in the film, Clemence and Rita, are not Jewish. Clemence was her grandmother was in the French Resistance, so she also had a very personal connection to this story. But I don't think it's a must. I think it helps, but I think, you know, the right actor of any kind can get to the right performance if the connection and the research and the preparation is done, you know, with enough effort to get there, and talent.
I think we can all agree that, you know, Midge Maisel is amazing, no matter the actress's
That's true,
actual heritage. But, you know, it is an interesting sort of controversy of the filmic arts at the moment. So another question from the audience here. How did the political climate, and I guess the time of production was quite extended for this film, but how did the political climate influence either your telling of the story or your performing of the story? How did it influence the final product?
The political climate in the US, or?
I assume the person meant specifically in the US, but also generally. You both sort of live international lives to a certain extent, so generally.
I mean, I can tell you when we shot the scene under the bridge in Nuremberg, it was the night after the shooting of the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh. You know, so there was a bunch of emotional American Jews, you know, performing that scene in Nuremberg because American Jews were just killed in a synagogue, you know, so it definitely affected, you know. I think there is certainly a tendency around the world to lead to the extremes, and I'm actually afraid that it's going to be exacerbated by the immense crisis that's coming after this epidemic. You know, if hatred was taking over when things were fine, imagine when 40% of the people don't have a job, you know. And it definitely inspired me to write this film, because I do think it's important to always remind people what intolerance can lead to, and to also invite people to take responsibility, because you never know when humanity will take, you know, the wrong path. And I think we have seen plenty of signs, you know, all around the world that that things can get ugly again.
Jesse, anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, what Jonathan said. I mean, yeah, I remember being, just about to shoot that scene in, Nuremberg, and that happening. Yeah, it's just, and I have a lot of friends in Pittsburgh, and somebody's family member was killed. Yeah, and it just kind of, it reiterates, that, just as a reminder, and and makes the thing we were doing there that much more kind of immediate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. As a director of a film festival, I watch a lot of films that are trying really hard to be important, and some of them are wonderful films, but maybe it's because of the cast and how you all work together. But this one felt important in a way that I don't know that it was necessarily, it wasn't screaming in bright neon lights, "I am important, pay attention to me." It just felt important. So I think all of that came through. Another question, this one's for Jesse. Is it harder to leave the character behind at night when it's a real person versus when it's a fictional person that you're playing?
Well, what was very unusual about this movie is that we were filming, in the location where this actually happened. And so, I spent most of my nights just, I'm probably like most people on this call right now, am so curious about that period of time, just because it's so shocking and it's so shaped our culture. That I spent a lot of the nights just reading about World War II, and Jonathan has an encyclopedic memory for this stuff. So I would tell Jonathan, this thing I read online, he would usually fill out the information that I missed. But this one was a particularly unusual experience because, you would shoot during the day and then go home and be in the area where it all took place. Just by way of brief example, Munich is about 20 minutes outside of Dachau, which was like the most important concentration camp at the beginning of the war for, high-ranking political enemies, and then of course became more general. But I took my wife and my 1-year-old to Dachau. I assumed he's too young to be shocked, of course, by it, and he didn't know where we were. And he started running around and laughing on the overgrown area where the barracks once stood. And at first, of course, I was embarrassed because I didn't want to, turn this somber experience for other people into a child laughing. But then it occurred to me it's exactly the theme of the movie. The characters in this movie say the best way to resist is to survive. And what more of an example of survival is this 1-year-old kid, 70 years later, running on the barracks where his ancestors were were exterminated. And so, so that kind of, I would say crystallized the experience for me. So in terms of taking, a character, not, leaving or whatever, I wouldn't really put it that way. I would say, the emotional experience of getting into a character in the mindset like this was that much more overpowering and overwhelming, but not in a way that I was upset by. It's more interesting to engage fully in a project than to kind of half do it.
So it's sort of forced method acting in a way.
Yeah.
So a question for Jonathan. Which scene was the hardest to shoot? And I guess you could answer this emotionally or technically.
I mean, technically, I would think that the tree in the forest, because putting a bunch of children in a tree is complicated. They have to be harnessed, there can be absolutely no risk. And on top of that, once they are up there, they need to perform, so it was very difficult and time consuming. And everything with the snow, we didn't have real snow because there's this thing called global warming, so it doesn't snow in Germany anymore. So we had to create fake snow, and cover the entire forest with fake snow, which was, I mean, it was creatively gorgeous because we were able to control the snow, but it was challenging because, you know, there was no snow. That was all that sequence in the forest was probably the hardest one to shoot, both emotionally and technically. You know, I think everything else, it was just part of, everything was hard. You know, there wasn't a restaurant scene, you know, in this movie. Everything was emotional. Everything was demanding. Everybody's running for their lives, and even when they're laughing, it's a miracle that they're laughing because their parents were just killed. So it's emotional on top of it. But you know, there wasn't an easy day, and we had a very tight schedule, but at the same time everybody was incredibly well prepared, and everybody loved the projects, and the actors were phenomenal. So, I mean, when you work with this level of talent, is a lot easier, you know, to make things happen, because everybody's very prepared, and European actors are very, very good at preparing, and it's something I learned in this film. I never shot in Europe before, and it was fascinating to see, you know, their techniques and the way they create the character. And so there wasn't anything easy, but it was all, you know, very gratifying.
Great. All right. So now we have just about enough time to maybe have someone ask a question live on video. We have a great comment that I think speaks for everyone who's seen the movie. It says, I knew the story of Marceau, but watching the movie was so emotional. It was interesting watching Marceau's development and his growth. And I absolutely second that. I had a vague notion that Marcel Marceau was some kind of war hero, but I think, you know, even if you sort of knew the story going into it, watching his growth was really something. We have another question. How did the locals react to you all being there and filming this big film?
I did take a picture of a guy in an SS uniform who was like an extra in the movie, at like a little corner deli buying some gum in the middle of the night. And I said to, this was in Prague, and I said to the guy who was playing the Nazi, I was like, isn't it strange? No one reacts? He goes, no, they film a lot of World War II movies here. So it was like, oh, they just are used to seeing Nazis and, you know, banners with swastikas in their town squares, and they can't park there for a few days because there's no parking. So I think like some of the locals, and then also we took over an entire square in Prague. I mean, this humongous town square, and turned it into the town square in Lyon, France, and with swastikas, and they were still doing bus tours in Prague, and so their buses would drive by and they'd be going on this tour of the beautiful city of Prague, and then for like 30 seconds of their trip they'd be transported back to 1942 Nazi occupied France, and that was pretty strange too. But I don't know, Jonathan, did you have any unusual experiences?
Yeah, I mean, half of it was shot in the Czech Republic and half in Germany. I mean, in the Czech Republic, in that square at night, we did get people who were pissed, you know, who didn't understand what was going on. And, you know, there was one guy, I think, was completely drunk and started kicking the Nazi tank that we had there, you know, and I think he was about to liberate Prague. But, and in Germany, I mean, you know, there was a few weird moments, you know, when they were creating the boucherie, the meat store, at the beginning of the movie, they were leaving the Stars of David at night, and there was a security problem, you know, because some folks, I guess, were asking too many questions, and you know, the art department decided to cover them at night, you know, because I guess it was attracting the wrong kind of people. And I did have an incident, you know, in post-production. We went to a pool, a public pool in Munich, outside of Munich, and there was this guy who entered the pool and had his entire back tattooed with the word Aryan. And, it was a hooligan, I guess, from Dresden, and a bunch of neo-Nazis were with him, and it was very shocking because there were like 100 Germans around and nobody was saying anything. They just accepted that some guy, is basically a neo-Nazi, and I asked the German friends who I was working with, and they said, "Listen, it's Germany, it's Southern Germany, and we know that guy is there probably looking for a fight. The minute you tell him something, you're gonna get into a fight, and most people just accept that is part of our difficult reality, and it was shocking. One thing is to see a neo-Nazi anywhere else. A very different thing is to see a neo-Nazi in Germany. And I would think a neo-Nazi in the United States would, people would be willing to get into a fight with him, but they weren't over there, and it was pretty shocking and difficult to see. I mean, the Germany is very specific place because most people deal with this in a very respectful and responsible way, but there is definitely a rise on neo-Nazis and intolerance, and they are all aware of it, and they're trying to deal with it, and they take measures all the time. But it's something that is certainly part of Germany, again, specifically in Eastern Germany, the side that was part of communist Germany, because they haven't evolved economically as strongly as the rest of Germany, and they also, their hatred is towards the communists, and they feel that they were oppressed by the communists, so they love the right or the extreme right, so they identify more with the Nazis because they feel that they were a rich country until the communists came. So it's in places like Dresden and Leipzig. There was this problem in the city called Halle in Yom Kippur, where this neo-Nazi almost entered a synagogue, almost shot 80 people. It would have been the worst massacre in Germany since the Olympics or since World War II. And, it was only by chance that he couldn't get through the door. But it was always strange, and there were a few episodes. One specific person in the crew that was, all the Czech were saying that she's racist, and she did say a couple of things, so it's probably the same percentage as anywhere else, but in Germany it just hurts more, and you're more aware, and it's more alarming. A racist German is a different league of racist.
So that brings up another, well, we're just about out of time, but one more quick question. So most film productions these days are quite international in terms of location shooting, he'll come back. Having the cast be from different places, the crew, and so on. And obviously this film was no exception, but of course, social norms vary from place to place, even within this country, never mind between countries. So how do you on set manage those sort of differing sets of rules? But rules is perhaps a subtle, is a bigger word, but the kind of subtle cultural differences in terms of what is acceptable, what counts as racist, for example, what counts as misogynist, so on and so forth. How do you manage all of that?
Well, managing wise, you would have to talk to my wife, who's the producer of the movie and who managed the entire crew, and is the only reason Jesse and I survived this war. It's difficult because the Germans and the Czech don't get along, so that was in itself an entire challenge. But I think, there is a commonality to all film crews and to all film professionals, and we were able to, there were different rules, how many hours you can shoot in the Czech Republic, then you cross the border and you can shoot at different hours. There's different currency. Everything was different, and that was a very big challenge in itself, you know, to change from one location from the other. Happily, you know, both Jesse and I were able to focus on the creative while we have a phenomenal team of producers worrying about those things. But it was tough. I mean, a lot of the department heads were actually Latinos because they have been working with me, you know, for a few movies, and you know, it was also complicated for German crew to be bossed around by Jews and Latinos. But it was great. I mean, people in the end were phenomenal. I mean, there were some incredibly talented people from all over the world working on this film. Everybody loved the film and really cared about it. And we were able to pull it off without really any incident. When you're making a movie about a subject matter like this, everybody knows you're doing it for the right reasons. You know, it's not a movie you're doing to get the #1 place in the box office, even though we were #1 2 weeks ago because there's no other movies in theaters. But you know, it's very clear from the beginning when you make a movie like that this is not about, you know, being arrogant or being comfortable. There's clearly gonna be sacrifices, and there's clearly gonna be more effort than your typical movie, and everybody was on board. And I think in the end, everybody was very, very happy with the whole shoot.
Okay, well, thank you both for coming and joining us this evening. Thank you to all of our audience members who came and joined us. And I hope if you haven't already gone and rented Resistance, you should do that. You can if you go to resistance.movie/watch-at-home, there's a link in the chat box. You can find all the different places where you can rent this film. Highly recommended. Thank you very much, Jonathan Jakubowicz and Jesse Eisenberg, for joining us this evening. Have a great evening, everyone, and stay healthy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.